Hello, church. Great to be with you again as we have another daily devotional today. Today, we're going to talk about, in fact, over the next 3 days, we're going to talk about how we got the Bible. There's been some questions come up during our Bible study on Sunday mornings on the book of Daniel. And people are talking about the reliability of the Bible, what constitutes a book getting into the Bible, what doesn't. And so we want to see if our Bible passes the test. So we're going to talk about that today. So lots of people talk about this. Can they trust what they are reading? And hopefully we will answer that question in these next 3 studies. So that brings us to something called the acid test. You see a couple of coins here, and you see a couple of different colors on these coins. A severe trial is something called an acid test. The term originated during the times when gold was widely circulated. Nitric acid was applied to an object of gold to see if it was genuine or not. If it was fake, the acid decomposed. If it was genuine, the gold was unaffected. Now, when dealing with our Bibles today, the same test must be applied to see if it will hold up to the test of being genuine. Okay? So, there's gold, and there's someone trying to apply that acid to that gold, okay? And what we're after is that gold is pure, it is genuine, it is 100%, it is something that is real. We want to do the same with our Bibles. So that brings us to the Bible. Now, we know the Bible is split into 2 different parts. We have the Old Testament and the New Testament. Today, we're going to look at the Old Testament and see if the Old Testament passes this test. So let's give it a look. So, a couple of facts about the Old Testament. The Old Testament was originally written in the Hebrew language. In fact, it was written backwards. So when you see a sentence, Hebrew is written backwards. So the scholars today have to take it and restructure the sentence so it will come out so we can understand it in English. Just a side note there, okay? Now, we know that when we were going through the book of Daniel that we saw that the Israelites were hauled away into slavery over into Babylon. That's what brought Daniel over there. Well, when they went there, they spoke a different language. And so part of the Old Testament was also written in Aramaic. And you can see this in the book of Daniel, right? So in Daniel, it changes into this other language of Aramaic. And you can also see this in the book of Ezra, okay, because it was dealing with this same time frame. All right. But then as time went on, it got translated into the Greek. Now we're still dealing with the Old Testament. And when it got translated into the Greek, the Old Testament, it was called the Septuagint. So I don't know if you've heard of that or not. But the Old Testament in Hebrew was started in 1440 BC with Moses, right? And then in 722, and then beginning in 605 BC, the Israelites, the northern tribe, was hauled away to the Assyrians, and they were spread all over the world. And then the southern tribe, Judah, was hauled into slavery into Babylon. So here you have the Israelites being spread all over the world. And as that happened, that caused them to forget their old language. And so the New Testament was written in Greek, a new language. Now, when we come to our New Testament, the New Testament many times will quote the Old Testament. And we see that sometimes when the inspired writers quoted, sometimes they quoted from the Septuagint. Now, how do we know that? Because there's a difference between the Septuagint in some verses versus the Hebrew. Okay? Now, again, we're trying to get everything back to getting to be genuine. We want everything to be absolute and perfect, right? But sometimes, like in the book of Hebrews, here's a couple examples. When they quoted Deuteronomy and Psalms, they were said a little bit differently than the original Hebrew. So, apparently, that was okay. In fact, even Jesus sometimes quoted from the Septuagint, which was a little different than the Hebrew. So, apparently, that's okay with God. Both were correct, even though they were worded just a little bit differently. Now, you think about that. When we come to our translations today, and we're trying to get every word just right, and we have these disputes about translations, sometimes we can get into some really bad arguments over that, and a lot of division can take place. We need to remember this fact as we look at our translations. Okay. Now, we have no original copies of the Old Testament in our possessions today. It was the scribes' practice during the Old Testament times that when they copied a copy of the Old Testament, so that's what a scribe would do, he'd sit here and actually copy it because they didn't have copy machines. So he'd copy it word for word. Okay. So when they copied a new copy of the Old Testament, they would destroy the old one. That was their practice under Old Testament times. Thus, the older copies are no longer with us today. They would just keep destroying those. Now, this has caused some doubt to doubt the reliability of our Old Testament. Now, since we don't have any of those originals and those older copies, before these doubts set in, a person should first consider the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, have you heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Let's talk about them for a minute. So, this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in these mountains. You can see the caves there, okay? And they were in these clay jars. Here's a picture of the Dead Sea. Not a very pretty place. In fact, it can really smell in certain spots because of all the minerals. In fact, if you have a hard time swimming and you want to learn how to swim, or you just don't know how to swim, go to the Dead Sea and you probably won't drown because those minerals will hold you up, okay? Now, here is one of those caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And in 1947, a little boy was playing and he threw a rock up into those caves. When he threw that rock up in that cave, it broke something. It sounded like glass breaking. So that caused that little boy to climb up, and this is what he found. He found some clay jars. He'd actually broken one of them, and inside were all these scrolls. And because of the humidity and things and temperature, these scrolls survived all this time. Okay? And here's the location where those scrolls were found. You can see where Jerusalem is, and these are all right around the Dead Sea. Okay? Now, up until 1947, the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest copies of the Old Testament that we had were dated 90 AD. 90 years, that's about 60 years after Jesus came to this earth. Now, since these copies were dated after the life of Jesus, many claim that the prophecies made about Jesus, because there's a bunch of prophecies in the Old Testament about Jesus, were added to the text after his life and not prophesied before. That like they just wrote parts of Jesus into the Old Testament, thus making these statements about Jesus fraudulent. Now, the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls showed evidence to destroy this theory. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained all the Old Testament books of the Old Testament, except one, and that was the book of Esther. Now, what is amazing about these books of the Old Testament is that they match our copies of the 90 AD copies perfectly. They also hold within them all the prophecies of Jesus. They were all there. So within these writings, we were also able to identify who these writings were attributed to. They were attributed to the Essenes. And the Essenes lived between 400 and 250 years before Christ. They lived up in these caves, okay? So that's an important fact because it helps us to date those Old Testament writings of the Dead Sea, placing them at least 250 years prior to the arrival of Jesus to this earth, not after. Therefore, this proves that the prophecies about Jesus were written in the Old Testament hundreds of years before he lived, and they weren't added in after. So, here's the original writings between Moses and Malachi. The oldest copies we had were 90 AD. Jesus came and lived between 4 BC and 29 AD. Those are the best years I can come up with. And then we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And those Dead Sea Scrolls matched up perfectly with the copies that we had in 90 AD. So what does that tell you? It passed the acid test. It's legit. Okay? They match perfectly. Here's another way to test, and that is historically. We find that historically the Old Testament is accurate. What do I mean by that? Another fact to help us trust our Old Testament is that it is historically accurate. The Old Testament writes about many events and people that are all written in other historical writings of that time. That means that they're not made up or people that are, just some story made. These are real people and real places. For instance, the historian Herodotus, we talked about this in class a couple weeks ago, confirmed events of the Babylonians, the Medo-Persian kingdoms that coincide with the Old Testament. Writings of Egyptian priests tell us some of the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea that our Old Testament writers write about. That's in Egyptian history. In fact, in 1950, the finding of the existence of the Hittite nation goes hand in hand with what is written in our Old Testament. This and much more proves that the Old Testament writings tell us about real people and real events. One more time, the Old Testament passes the acid test. And here's another way to confirm it. Other writers confirm. The Old Testament writers also support and confirm each other. The prophet Daniel confirms the prophet Jeremiah. So they're complementing each other. They're confirming each other because they write about each other. Okay, these are both Old Testament books. The prophet Isaiah tells of events that took place in the time of Daniel and Ezra, hundreds of years before they actually happened. Hosea talks about David. Jeremiah tells of events involving Moses and Samuel. And Nehemiah tells stories about Joshua. Do you see? These are all Old Testament books. Sometimes hundreds of years before these events ever took place. This shows us that the writings of the Old Testament were in sync with one another. They did not contradict or tell opposing sides of the same stories. This should prove to us that again that the Old Testament is reliable and trustworthy. So here's just a couple examples of this. We actually went over these in class. The 70-year captivity, okay, that was prophesied by Jeremiah, right? And then Daniel's going to go into slavery, and it is fulfilled between 586 and 535. Daniel 2. So Daniel points back, Jeremiah points forward. They both confirm each other. And Ezra chapter 1 verse 1 through 4 confirms it also. So here's the confirmation. Jeremiah 20:10, this is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise and bring you back to this place. So what's Jeremiah doing? He's pointing forward. Now, years later, in fact, 70 years, watch what happens. Daniel writes, and he says, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the scriptures, according to the word of the Lord given to Jeremiah the prophet, that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. So what's Daniel doing? He's over here in 535 BC, and he's pointing backwards. The two confirm each other. Okay? Interesting. King Cyrus. Here's another one. Okay? King Cyrus is prophesied in 22 BC by Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 44. He is confirmed and is told about in where? Ezra chapter 1. And Ezra chapter 1 is in 535 BC. That's almost 200 years. He's prophesied 200 years before the guy comes along perfectly. Watch the Bible. We also see this in Daniel chapter 10, verse 1. So who says of Jerusalem, it shall be inhabited, of the towns of Judah, they shall be rebuilt, and of their ruins I will restore them. Who says of the watery deep, be dry, and I will dry up your streams? Who says of who? Cyrus, he's my shepherd. He will accomplish that which I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt. Remember what's going to happen to Jerusalem? What's going to happen in the future? It's going to be destroyed by the Babylonians. Cyrus is going to come along and tell the Israelites to go back home and rebuild it. This is prophesied in 722 BC. It's pointing forward. When we get to the book of Ezra, watch what happens. In the first year of who? King Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by who? Jeremiah. The Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and to put in writing, this is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. So Isaiah prophesies it. Jeremiah tells about the 70 years of captivity. And then Cyrus comes along at the end of the 70 years of captivity and lets the people go back home. That's what the rest of this text says. So here we have Ezra pointing backwards. So Ezra's involved, right? Jeremiah's involved, and Daniel's involved, and Isaiah's involved. They're all connected to each other, giving confirmation to these books. Conclusion. Therefore, the Old Testament holds up to the acid test, and this should tell us that we can trust its writings. Now, there are lots of other writings outside of the Bible that never made it into the Old Testament, but they don't pass this test. They don't hold up. Geography is wrong. They tell things that are wrong. They don't have these prophecies. They don't connect to other books of the Bible, and so they don't pass the test, so they are left out. Hope that makes sense to you. We'll see you next time. Man, my time is way up. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. God bless.